Welcome, everyone, to this special live streaming presentation. I'm Carl Valianatos, Assistant Superintendent of Curriculum and Instruction, and I am joined here with some of our outstanding staff members of McHenry High School, Michelle Zimmerman, Abby Bielinski, and Nicole Bacigalupo. We're going to be talking a little bit today about the expansion of blended learning in District 156 that will be taking place next year with all the other amazing changes. With the campus transition and the completion of our Center for Science, Technology, and Industry and all of the amazing spaces at both of our campuses, we're going to be expanding blended learning in District 156 from about 14 blended classes to over 50 blended classes. So it's important that we have lots of conversations and we have lots of understanding with our parents and our students and our staff members about what blended learning is. So with that, I want to hand it off to Ms. Bielinski, who will be talking about what blended learning is.
Thank you so much, Carl. All right, so blended learning can look quite different depending on how teachers structure things, but it's typically defined as a combination of in-class learning, face-to-face instruction, as well as out-of-class digital activities. So students, when they're not in class, will have some control over the time, the place, the pace, and the path of their learning. Ms. Zimmerman is going to tell us a little bit more about what blended learning can look like in the different models right now.
Hi, everyone. One of the things that I just wanted to mention is blended learning has been happening for a long time. And I think for a lot of you, you've been doing it as a teacher or you've been experiencing it as a student, but it wasn't labeled as blended learning. And now with the increased use of technology, there are more formal models of blended learning that are out there. And so we've just listed a few of them here for you. But as I explain them a little bit, you might have been thinking about how you have already experienced this in the classroom. One of the things I'm going to start with is just the idea of a flex-based model of blended learning. And we're already doing that in District 156 with our alternative programs here, where we have our CALA program and we have our Warrior Academy. So there's a lot of those skills that are being used as blended learning models already in our district. What you're probably most familiar with is the face-to-face idea of blended learning, coming into the classroom and meeting with your teacher face-to-face, getting that kind of feedback, getting to see your classmates live and having discussion and hearing instruction and just working in the actual classroom itself. The blended part is where we kind of mix in that online learning, and it doesn't necessarily have to happen only in the classroom. And this is where a lot of that flexibility comes into place, where you can be working in blended areas in the school, learning spaces. You could be working at home. You could be working with classmates. You could be working individually. So there's so many different ways that we can bring technology into blended learning that supports and facilitates even higher levels of learning and independence with students beyond just the classroom walls. And the last one I just want to touch base with a little bit is the mastery base. This is something I'm really excited about because this is very individual for students. It allows them to demonstrate their proficiency in skills, and it kind of tracks their development where they don't advance to a new skill until they show their proficiency in the one that they're currently working on. And that way students can kind of work at their own pace and they don't have to keep up with the whole classroom at one time. So I'm really excited about that model. I didn't talk a lot about the rotation blended learning, but I think a lot of you might be familiar with the idea of rotations more at the elementary level, but there are some places where we can also use it at the high school. And basically the teacher gives a little bit of instruction and then students hop on their computers and they start working electronically through different skills, but it's like a fixed time. So they might work on a certain skill for 10 minutes and then advance to the next skill, and it's very organized. So if you're in athletics, you might be familiar to working through stations in your athletics. But these are just a few of the models that are out there. There are so many, and there's so many, not to use the word blended again, but there's so many ways to take different parts of blended learning and blend them into other parts and just be really autonomous and meet the needs of the students with those. So, you know, I mentioned a little bit about some of the benefits. For me as a teacher, one of the benefits that I see the most is being able to connect and check in with my students to meet their individual needs more quickly because I'm able to chart their progress in our Schoology platform so I can see their independent learning when they're outside of class. And then when they're in the class, a lot of times we're working in smaller individualized groups. And so I get to sit down with those small groups of students and we get to dive really deep into the learning. And I get to know more about them on a deeper level because I'm able to devote a whole class period to just that small group of students instead of trying to meet the needs of everybody at the same time. And I know my students have told me that they really appreciate getting to have a little bit more autonomy. And I've seen their skills in terms of managing their own academic grading and revision just really be heightened, and they're not relying on me to do so much managing for them. So those are just a couple of the reasons that I'm excited about it.
So as a counselor, I really like blended learning because I think it helps prepare students for their post-secondary environments. So something that's really important when students are engaging in blended learning is that they're using their executive functioning skill. These are skills that students are naturally developing throughout high school, and the goal is that by the time they've graduated, they really strengthen these skills so they can be successful in the future. Blended learning helps students take ownership in learning, and in doing so, they're spending more time working independently. So they have to strengthen their executive functioning skills like the ability to manage their time more effectively, the ability to make deadlines, the ability to collaborate with peers and communicate more efficiently. No matter what their post-secondary journey is, all of these skills are going to be crucial. Whether they go into the military or college or the workforce, they're going to be expected to collaborate with others and make deadlines and work on projects themselves.
Yeah.
Research on blended learning shows that increased communication and socialization, both online and in person, increases satisfaction with the course. So from a student perspective, blended learning gives them the ability to work on school outside of the typical school environment, especially when it comes to the classroom. I know that when I was at East Campus last year, I'd walk through the Commons and I would see students grouped together working on their blended learning work. They were socializing a little bit, but they were actually working a lot. And you can tell they really enjoyed being outside of the classroom. And in a minute, we're going to look at the new space that we're going to have at West Campus. And I can't wait to see students working on their blended learning in this new space and collaborating.
And kind of jumping off of what you just said about all of these life skills and taking them throughout their futures, it's also a really good opportunity for you to start as a student as well as, with your teacher, collecting digital assignments and creating things online, because you're entering into a world that is so dependent on technology. And so creating that digital footprint and knowing how to utilize those tools effectively and meaningfully is going to be something that's so important for you to take with you into your future, no matter what you do. Another thing that I really like about blended learning is that it gives me more individual time with my students too. So if students are able to go off and work on their individual projects, they might not need to be in the classroom, but there's some students that actually will choose to stay in the classroom. And it provides me with the opportunity to kind of build a stronger relationship and with my students and learn more about them and from them, as well as see what they're passionate about. My students will come back to class the next day with whatever it is they researched on their own, and the passion that they have, which I'll talk a little bit more about it later, is just so evident. And I think that that's a piece that I really love the most about blended learning structures.
So what's exciting about the 2021-2022 school year is that we've expanded our blending choices a ton. So previously, we only had a select number of blended courses. We've expanded that to 52 courses that are blended, 9 of those being offered in the traditional format as well. What's new is that we have more options for our sophomores. Previously, the options were typically for seniors, some for junior students, but coming down the pipeline are courses that students take sophomores, like Algebra 2, English 2, and Health. In the future, we might offer some classes for freshmen as well, just so they can start experiencing blended learning a little bit differently, though. The restrictions are going to be a little bit greater for freshmen during that blended time because they're not as responsible with their free time as our upperclassmen. We also have classes in all of the departments. So we have math, PE, science, blended courses, where previously it was very elective heavy. So that's exciting as well.
I'd like to jump in and just highlight some of the amazing spaces that we're continuing to add in District 156. This, again, is not new. It's been a progression that we've been moving towards for about the last 5 years. with upgrades to many of our hallways in both campuses and upgrades to our media centers. But as you know, at our upper campus, we're going to have the brand new Center for Science, Technology, and Industry. And as you can see here, I'm going to show you some renderings. The hallways, the ends of each hallways, the middles of our hallways are all going to have amazing areas for students to be out of class some days if they meet certain criteria, to work, to have choice and personal responsibility in what they would like to be working on and who they would like to be working with, and amazing areas for them to collaborate all over our school. This is an example of at the end of each hallway in the new center, we'll have a lot of soft spaces for students to study. For those of you who know where our current art rooms are at West Campus, those will be demolished over the summer. Art will be moving. Sorry, Zim, I know that little small in the eye there.
It's a beautiful space, though.
It is going to be beautiful. This is going to be a large hallway concourse area that is going to run down the hallway into the new center. And again, it's going to be a large area there, similar to as if you're walking through the airport, where you can sit down and you can relax and you can do some studying or some reading. This is going to be the hallway area of the 400 level of the new center, which is going to be dedicated to math. So on the math hallway, there's going to be out in the halls, there's going to be lots of places where students can collaborate and do their math homework. There's also going to be fishbowl kinds of common conference room areas where groups of students can work on projects, project, and dialogue and collaborate. And then lastly, down the existing 200 level hallway at the upper campus, down by the media center, we are going to be constructing a really large, brand new, state-of-the-art college and career center that's going to have in its interior a lot of these soft spaces for presentations, for students to go and visit and work, and be able to access all of their counselors in one place. So I'd like to hand it back to Ms. Zimmerman and Mrs. Bielinski to talk a little bit about what blended learning is like from the teacher perspective.
Well, over the past 2 years, I've had an opportunity to work with students in a blended learning situation. And I think my situation was a tiny bit unique because I had 3 different levels of arts that were meeting at the same time. So I had an independent studio course, an honor studio course, and then an advanced placement studio course. So we shared the same space. And once we were able to start working in a blended environment, it was so much easier for me to manage those different learning groups and give each group more individualized attention and allow them to find their own workspace and their own collaborative efforts outside of the classroom. So I could really just focus on a small group of students at a time. And with the blended learning model, it also gives a chance to have our all play days where, you know, all of our sections would come together at the same time and we would get to critique or exchange ideas. So there was just so much opportunity to build connections and relationships and to really get to understand what art is about, but also just to really immerse ourselves in learning that was personal, but also very meaningful. So my takeaways were just the increased relationships that were built and just getting to really challenge my students individually. And it was so much more difficult to do that when all of my students were meeting at the same time, but having so many different learning needs. And so I can't say enough about how much it's helped me and my students.
Yeah. And jumping off of that, I mean, just seeing the students connect with one another about things that, you know, maybe before they entered the classroom, they didn't know that they were passionate about the same things. And so kind of seeing them dive into common, common things that they both love. Yeah, it's just been awesome to kind of see. And what's really cool about blended too, coming from the social science perspective, I've taught both economics and U.S. history at this point. And both classes, students are able to have more time to kind of go beyond the content and build on the skills that we're working on in class and pursue things that they get excited about. So if there's a moment in history that they get really excited about, they have the time and the opportunity to really be able to dig deep into that at a level that is far beyond what we would typically see in a general education setup like that. So it's really, really cool. And another part that I also really enjoy is seeing my students kind of develop as individuals who can advocate for their own needs too. So kind of building the skill of asking for what they need rather than me telling, okay, I think you need more time on this. They'll say, is it okay if I do this? And kind of seeing that self-advocacy develop is something that I think is really awesome to see, and it gets me so excited for them as well. And so just, again, I just can't say enough good things about the opportunity that blended learning and instruction has provided for both myself as the teacher as well as my students even more.
So at this point, I want to introduce one of my students who's currently enrolled in Advanced Placement Studio Art. We haven't had a chance to meet. We've been remote this whole time, but she was in my class last year in the blended learning environment. So she's going to kind of give us a student perspective as to how blended learning worked for her and what her observations were for her classmates. So I'm going to start with one of our questions here, and it's a general question. I'm just curious, Emma, what do you think the advantages of blended learning were for you as a student and for your classmates?
Yeah, sure. So for me, there were a lot of advantages. I'd say one, I think it was mentioned in the presentation, is there's kind of an allowance of, engaging in material at your own pace is something that, and then I'd say for me, the variety of different learning environments that I was able to engage in and connecting with different people was really helpful for me too, in the subject that I was studying, and also just with personal relationships as well.
So from that, and so how do you think blended learning helps teachers?
I'd say for teachers, it's a more personalized experience with students. I think for our class specifically, I was in honors, and the class was a bit smaller, so the teacher was able to work closely with students for, like I said, a more personalized learning experience.
So you've been talking about the idea of how you really liked that things were more personalized because the groupings were smaller. So if we take those individual learning groups and take those different environments, you've said a lot about how they benefited you. Did you see any way that it also challenged you and stretched you and developed your learning more?
Yeah, I think being able to balance the different sizes of the groups was a difficulty for me. I think learning to work with different sizes of groups within a variety of people is something that I'm going to definitely need to use for my future. So that was definitely something that was a bit of a challenge for me. Yeah.
Okay. After that, you brought up your future. So how do you think it, beyond that, how has blended learning prepared you for your future? Any other skills or things?
Yeah, for college, I'm planning to go to college, and I know that a lot of college classes are not exactly, they don't meet every day. So I think there's a lot of independence and responsibility that's required for, this blended learning, and more so just college in general. And you need to be able to work on your own as well as work in a class environment with others. So that's actually prepared me a lot for my future as well.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today, Emma. Really appreciate what you have to say.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Emma.
All right, so moving on from that, course selection is actually happening this month in just a couple weeks. So if you haven't already, you should be having conversations as a family about what classes your student is interested in taking next year. I would definitely recommend talking about the benefits of blended learning and encouraging students to lean in and try a blended class. I think that the independence that you gain from these classes is very helpful, and students can become an agent of their education and learn some of those helpful new skills that we talked about earlier. The course descriptions and more detail is going to be in the curriculum guide pictured on the right, which you can find on our district website and in your student's Schoology page.
So final thoughts.
Oh, one final thought I had that I didn't articulate earlier is that overall, I think students having a more more control over their time is just going to help them not only academically, but just help them find some balance. As a counselor, I notice a lot of students have anxiety, and I think that if students have more control over what they do in the school day, they might have more time after school to engage in after school activities, a job, or just take time for themselves. So I'm really excited to see what blended learning does in that regard.
Yeah, and jumping off of that as a coach, so I coach a varsity sport, seeing my students who were in blended classes, they just felt a little bit more at ease. They felt like they had ownership of their time during their school day, and then they were able to come to practice, and they just had a different air about them. Like they were able to schedule themselves, and they really were able to take full ownership of their day. And I can't stress that enough. It's a great additional point.
That's great.
Yeah, and I agree with that too, because I think about, how, when kids are involved in jobs and they have their co-curricular activities, there are days that are going to be busier than others. And we know that as adults. And letting them have the autonomy to go through a learning module and realize as they skim through it what they have to do and when they have to do it by, and then having that freedom to pick a day as they're organizing their time and know that I have to organize, I have to get this much of my course module done today because I know tomorrow I'm going to be swamped. And I think one of the nice things about blended learning is giving students that flexibility to meet their needs.
Definitely.
Well, thank you all for providing all that great information about blended learning, and thanks to Emma, and good luck to all students and parents as we walk together through this journey of all these exciting changes at McHenry High School. Take care, everyone.
Bye.